Connor Bedard and the kids must be the priority for Anders Sorensen.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can go and find me on X at Jack Bushman 2, but be sure to check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Be sure you're subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube as well. It's 100% free, won't cost you anything, and really does help yours truly out tremendously. And last but certainly not least, got to shout out today's sponsor, which is FanDuel. Go and check out FanDuel.com right now to win $150 worth of bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins with America's #1 sportsbook. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Yesterday, obviously, was a pretty hectic day for our Blackhawks. Luke Richardson officially out. Anders Sorensen steps in as the interim coach, which, by the way, he will remain as the interim for the remainder of the regular season as the Blackhawks will conduct a thorough search for their next full-time head coach. And just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, go and check out yesterday's beefy episode of Locked On Blackhawks, where I gave my full reaction on the decision to fire Luke Richardson, whether I thought it was right or wrong to fire him during the midst of the season, and also some quick implications on a new head coach stepping in. And to open things up on the show here today, I want to talk real quick for a moment about whether I think Anders Sorensen was the right call for the new interim head coach. And quite honestly, Blackhawks fans, there were only two real options here for the Blackhawks: Anders Sorensen or Derek King. It wouldn't really make sense for the Blackhawks with 56 games left in the year. I know it's a significant amount of games for the time being, but you don't really need to bring someone in from the outside, give them an opportunity, especially when you do want to give someone like Anders Sorensen, who Kyle Davidson in the front office are very high on, an opportunity here. And as far as the Sorensen versus Derek King debate, I'm sure there were a lot of people who, when they saw Sorensen was the one stepping in, were like, wait a minute, Derek King still been here as an assistant coach since he was an interim not all that long ago during the 2021-22 campaign, and it was kind of close to the same amount of games that year after he had to take over once Jeremy Colton was let go. But we had seen how things went with Derek King. That was also a much different group. Alex DeBrincat, Patrick Kane, Jonathan Taves were still there. Brandon Hagel, Dylan Strome were on the team as well. That was a much more capable offensive bunch in a different time period of the Blackhawks. And I thought Kyle Davidson's logic behind the decision to go with Anders Sorensen was really wise as well. Davidson said during his presser today, quote, "It's just more so Anders is a new face, new voice, new ideas. It was something new. We've gone down that road with Kinger before, and I think there could be some fear of him just being the de facto interim guy." And I think this is just an opportunity, again, to try something new. Derek King has been part of this coaching staff. I'm sure he's had his input and has given some advice to Luke Richardson, and it's time to try something a little bit outside the box with what Anders Sorensen has been doing down in Rockford. And quite honestly, that's also why I think it was a really wise decision here by Kyle Davidson, because the name of the game for the Blackhawks the rest of the year is all about Connor Bedard and the kids. And outside of Bedard, Sorensen has hands-on experience from their time down in Rockford with all the rest of them: Lukas Reichel, Alex Vlasic, Nolan Allen, Wyatt Kaiser, right? Sorensen coached down in Rockford the last 3 years. He's also been part of that organization since 2014, stepped on as an assistant in 2018. So he's been around the development of this group and just been part of a development program for a while now. And again, with that being the name of the game, I think that's why Sorensen was the right call here. And also, based on what he said during his presser today as well, I really do think he's the right guy for the time being. Sorensen, first off, just right off the bat, said what his goals were stepping in as the interim, saying winning games and seeing progress in the younger players are the biggest things in his eyes coming into the head coaching role, and that was music to my ears. Every coach is going to say they want to win more games. And honestly, the Blackhawks aren't that far away from winning more games. And Kyle Davidson in his presser even said the reasons things went sideways for us were likely fixable. The Blackhawks were close. There were not a lot of, of the 18 losses they have, I think only 2 of them have been by 3 goals or more. They've been close in a lot of these games. It was just kind of some of the habitual issues that Davidson alluded to that was costing them some games, and that's ultimately why they had to go in a different direction, because they couldn't allow those issues to plague them any further. But for Sorensen right off the bat to come in and say the younger players are the biggest thing in his eyes the rest of the way, absolutely beautiful. Connor Bedard, of course, needs to be the top priority, starting to get him going, starting to get him more opportunities, and Sorensen immediately said we have to find ways to get him playing with the puck in motion. And I think the same thing goes with Lukas Reichel, who's one of the few players who has wheels and offensive abilities on this team. He, Bedard, Vlasic, Kaiser, Allen, that's the name of the game this year. I do wonder how Sorensen is going to handle some of the veteran guys because, as an AHL head coach, he hasn't really had to deal with this type of situation. It's a whole different atmosphere with what the Rockford Ice Hogs were trying to do at that level. So I'm sure that's going to be a little interesting mix, but ultimately the youngsters are what matters right here, right now in a season that ultimately in the long run doesn't mean much outside of that for the Blackhawks. I also really like to hear Anders Sorensen reference that offense just needs to be more of a focus. And I think he is going to try to get away from some of Luke Richardson's demands more out of this group as a whole. He mentioned the word pace like 10 times during his presser here today. And I also like to hear him say that the defensemen need to get more active in the offensive zone and jump up in the rush. I mean, with Seth Jones out right now, the Blackhawks defensemen offensively aren't really providing all that much. Alex Vlasic did score a goal a couple of nights ago. I do got to give credit to Connor Murphy because he's on pace for shattering career highs offensively. But in the goals column, Alex Vlasic is the only one of the Louis Crevier scored his first AHL goal. Anyways, Vlasic has 1 goal. Crevier has 2 goals out of the Blackhawks. 7 active defensemen on their roster right now. It's all the goals they've accounted for this year. Seth Jones has the rest of them. So Blackhawks need to get more out of their young players. They need to play with more pace, need to, I think, play more off of the rush, something that Sorensen alluded to as well. Under Richardson, they were a dump and chase team. They just didn't have the speed, didn't have good enough performances out of guys like Tyler Bertuzzi, Teuvo Teravainen, Philip Kurashev, guys who aren't typically lugging the mail up the ice and are the supporters in the offensive zone. Wasn't getting good enough performances out of those guys. So something had to change. Feels like Anders Sorensen is coming in and going to do that here at least a little bit with the mentality and the style of play. And I think that's ultimately what led to Luke Richardson getting fired, was the style of play and the mentality of the team. Defense first at all costs. They weren't getting anything done offensively, and also the young players weren't really being able to shine. So I'm excited that Anders Sorensen is going to shake things up. Clearly, he's going to prioritize Connor Bedard and the young players. And coming up in just a moment, Blackhawks fans, I'll actually talk more about how Anders Sorensen and this coaching staff can get more out of number 98, Connor Bedard. But first, real quick, I do got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action in the second half of the regular season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and will have the chance to win $150 worth of bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app now gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So that way, when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you also happen to place your bets. And not only do our Chicago Blackhawks have a new head coach, but so do the Chicago Bears. And if you think the Bears can ride that new interim coach boost, to some wins here in the second half of the season, make sure to go and check out FanDuel.com. You'll have a chance to win $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 wins. So first $5 bet wins, So never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the National Football League. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to say thank you to everyone real quick for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen. Here to start off your day. For your second listen, got to go check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast so that you can become a fantasy hockey expert and get daily tips from Steal and Flip. You can go and easily find Locked On Fantasy Hockey down in the description with the link, or simply search on YouTube and wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Segment 2, obviously, I just mentioned the priority for Anders Sorensen is to get Connor Bedard and this offense going. For Bedard in particular, how exactly can Sorensen do that? Well, I thought Scott Powers of The Athletic came out with a tremendous article earlier in the afternoon talking about some of the changes that Sorensen can make when referencing some interesting data. Of course, Bedard does have 2 or fewer shots on goal in 10 of his past 12 games. That's simply not good enough. We need him to be more aggressive with the puck on his stick. And quite honestly, I think a lot of that, for a 19-year-old kid, rightfully so, comes with confidence. I mean, going up against grown men, playing against the toughest competition you've ever played against, you're getting the opposing team's best defensive line or their top line night in and night out. It's not an easy feat for this kid, and we've seen with the amount of broken sticks and slamming sticks against the boards, he's been frustrated, and he's even alluded to in the media that his confidence has been a little bit rattled, and that just cannot happen. And I think that partly was because of, Luke Richardson's style and all what he demands from a center iceman on the defensive side of things. I also thought it was interesting in Scott Powers' article, not only did he reference the lack of shots that Connor Bedard has been getting recently, but also the lack of zone entries. As I referenced earlier, Richardson, a lot of dump and chase. For Connor Bedard's line in particular, that's never the bread and butter, especially when he's playing with Philip Kurashev or Teuvo Teravainen or Taylor Hall, right? Like smaller forwards, that's really not the bread and butter. And what we've seen for Bedard a lot at the NHL level, a lot of his success has come off the rush. I think that has been down this year just because he has taken on a larger defensive role. He's still not a perfect defensive center iceman, and I don't think he's ever going to be. And we're not really asking him to be that. We're just asking him to be a good 200-foot player. And under Richardson, he did take strides in that area. However, it was hindering his offensive game, and we just can't allow that to happen. So I think by going with Sorensen's style and clearly wanting to play with a little bit more pace, talking about getting Connor Bedard the puck in motion, I expect Connor Bedard to be lugging the mail more through the neutral zone instead of helping get it out of the defensive zone. And I also really like to hear Sorensen mentioned he wants to go and talk with Connor Bedard, have a good sit-down chat with him, and pick his brain a little bit and ask him why he thinks things haven't been working so far. So I like that they're going to collaborate with one another. I think that's absolutely the smart way to go about things. And quite honestly, the communication from Luke Richardson and some of his players might not have been the best and ultimately could have led to him being fired by Kyle Davidson. So I like to hear Sorensen not only address Bedard and the young players as the priority, but already mentioning that he's going to have a conversation with Connor Bedard about this. Also, in Powers' article, mentioned the lack of Connor Bedard getting one-timers this year and also not getting a lot of looks from the left side. And I think the one-timer with his shooting capabilities, we need to get that activated more. And I know part of that on the power play is generating more weapons than just Connor Bedard at the left side, because unless you're Alex Ovechkin, right? Like, you can put defenders over there to kind of take that away. Ovi is kind of the outlier in that. Defenders and goalies have always known it's coming. They've put guys over there. Ovi's still going to wind up being the best goal scorer of all time, with that being kind of his forte. but we got to get Connor Bedard more looks over there at the left dot, and also just on the left side in general. Really interesting statistic here, Blackhawks fans. Last season, Connor Bedard, 41% of his shots on goal came from the left side of the ice, and he shot 19% when shooting from the left side and racked up 66% of his goals at even strength. From the right side last year, it's where 59% of his shots came from, a greater majority, but he only had a 7% conversion rate. This season, 77% of Connor Bedard's shots are coming from the right side. And obviously, I didn't see this data until earlier this afternoon, but just thinking about it, the amount of looks Connor Bedard has had from the right side, and I think more times than not, he's trying to go short side glove where there's just not a lot of room against NHL goaltenders. Doesn't surprise me that far side glove is where he's had a lot better success. So off the rush, we got to get Connor Bedard. Anders Sorensen has to make sure Connor Bedard gets more looks from the left-hand side. You got to draw up plays like that, transition opportunities, and just on the power play, you got to get him more one-timers and draw up looks that can at least get him those openings, because he's too talented of a shooter to only have 5 goals on the year. He's been getting the opportunities, but I think it's interesting that 77% of them have been coming from the right side this year. That could be a big part in him slacking in the goal scoring department. Also, just getting off the rush and not having as many dump and chase chances as a team, not only with Connor Bedard, but I think that is a better game plan for the Blackhawks. I know they don't have a ton of skaters, but you got to get guys like Taylor Hall who have some good wheels, like a Lukas Reichel. You got to get him more opportunities because there is just a lack of speed. As I broke down a couple of days ago on the show, out of the Blackhawks forwards, Ilya Mikheyev and Lukas Reichel are the only ones who are among the fastest skaters in the NHL, while Nick Foligno, Tyler Bertuzzi, Pat Maroon are all among the slowest skaters. Teuvo Teravainen even popped up in one of those stats as well. And then defensively, 3 of the 6 regulars on the back end for the Blackhawks, Alec Martinez, Connor Murphy, and TJ Brody, all rated among the top 20 slowest defensemen in the league, while only Alex Vlasic, which she only popped up in top speed, was among the top 20 in any of those 3 categories. So the guys who do have speed, Taylor Hall, Connor Bedard, Lukas Reichel, they got to get more opportunities through the neutral zone. And just for Reichel in general, he's got to get more looks inside the top 6 for the reasons I just mentioned, man. It's been such a struggle for the Blackhawks to go through the neutral zone. And quite honestly, because of those struggles, they've had to go to the dump and chase more times than not. Lukas Reichel cannot be playing 11 to 12 minutes per game the rest of the year under Anders Sorensen's helm. And based on the comments Sorensen made today, I don't think that's going to happen. But at some point or not, we got to get Lukas Reichel up on the top line, not only because the rest of the year is all about the young kids and the guys who could be puzzle pieces here moving forward, but because Lukas Reichel can actually help this team with one of its biggest deficiencies. He's got to be out there on the top power play unit at some point as well, because Teuvo Teravainen simply hasn't been good enough from the right dot. He doesn't really help out in terms of zone entry, skating the puck in. He's had a lot of bad turnovers here recently, and he doesn't really do all that much on the dump and chase as well. So those are kind of the tactics to get Connor Bedard and some of the prospects going to help out this Blackhawks struggling offense. Interested to see how things are going to look for the Chicago Blackhawks when they take on the Winnipeg Jets tomorrow afternoon when they're back in action. And coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, before I tie a bow on today's episode, I'll get into a brief preview of tomorrow's matchup against the Jets. Segment 3, the Blackhawks are back in action after a couple of days off. Tomorrow, taking on the Jets at the United Center. 3 p.m. Central Time puck drop, by the way. The first NHL game for interim coach Anders Sorensen. There was some clarification on that, by the way, today during the presser. Anders Sorensen, not Anders. But it's not going to be an easy first NHL coaching game for Anders Sorensen, as the Jets, of course, are off to a marvelous start. Currently 3rd in the NHL in points percentage with a 19-8-0 record through their opening 27 games. Have been struggling a little bit, though, here as of late, as they've only won 4 of their last 10. These two teams have already met this year, some of you may remember. You got to think all the way back to October 11th. second game of the year for the Blackhawks, home opener for the Winnipeg Jets. And the only thing that goes through my mind when thinking about this game is Dennis Green. We let him off the hook because that's what happened in Winnipeg. The Blackhawks, Ryan Donato scores. They're up 1-0 throughout the entirety of the third period. The Jets pull off Connor Hellebuck, and bam, with a minute and 4 seconds left, I think it was actually, Mark Scheifele ties the game 1-1, and then 30 seconds into overtime, scores his second goal for the game winner. Real tough one there for the Blackhawks to put them off to an 0-1-1 start to the year. Fortunately, they would respond nicely the next night by defeating the Edmonton Oilers 5-2. But this is a Jets team altogether that the Blackhawks have really struggled against over the years. Dating back to the start of 2021, the Hawks have won just 2 of the past 12 matchups against the Jets. Most of those games, though, came while Luke Richardson was coaching. So a new opportunity here for Anders Sorensen to show off his style and some of his changes. But yeah, it's not going to be an easy one for the Blackhawks for sure. What I really did want to get into, though, as far as this preview, Blackhawks fans, before I let you all get out of here and enjoy the rest of your weekends, is the lineup that Anders Sorensen went with during practice on Friday afternoon. There is the possibility that he changes it, but I wouldn't expect it. And there aren't really any massive changes here as far as the forward lines or the defensive pairings, and I think that was kind of as expected what Sorensen wanted to go with. And by the way, one thing I also like about Anders Sorensen is he is an analytics guy. I'm not the biggest analytics guy, but I do think that's something that you need to pay attention to as a head coach in today's day and age. It's not the end-all, be-all, I don't think. And quite honestly, once it comes playoff time, I think you can throw most of the analytics out the window, especially in like a game 5 through a game 7. The analytics, I don't think, really matter there. But I do think for a head coach in today's day and age, it's worth looking at these line combinations. And for a guy who is in tune with the analytics, I'm not surprised to see that Philip Kurashev, Connor Bedard, and Teuvo Teravainen are the Blackhawks' best line, because at 5-on-5, that has been the best trio with Connor Bedard so far this year. Teuvo Teravainen, he's had some ups, he's had some downs over the last couple of weeks, but most of his good games this year have come along with Connor Bedard. Philip Kurashev, I know it's been a real tough start to the year for him as well. Has not looked like the player he was last year, but of course, had that good chemistry with Bedard last year. They have good analytics with one another this season. And also, I think if you want to get Philip Kurashev going, you can't be asking him to play the center ice position. Maybe that changes under Anders Sorensen's leadership, but as a center iceman under Luke Richardson's helm, playing center was not good for Philip Kurashev. So I do like getting him back to the wing. We'll see how this trio looks, and then I think we're going to adjust accordingly, at least based on the comments from Sorensen. Second line for the Blackhawks, Taylor Hall, Ryan Donato, Tyler Bertuzzi. This was also a trio that, before the latest set of line blendering from Richardson, that was a trio that had found some success, so I'm okay with that trio. I also think you just have to stick together with Foligno Dickinson and Ilya Mikheyev. They are one of the best shutdown forward lines in all of the NHL. And then Pat Maroon, Lukas Reichel, Craig Smith. I don't mind it for the time being, but at some point in time, as I referenced during segment 2, because of his skill set, because it's such a deficiency and a need for this Blackhawks team, you got to get Lukas Reichel somewhere in the top 6, and he's got to be averaging at least 14 to 16 minutes per game. Defensively, same pairings from the last game against Boston, Vlasic and Murphy, no surprise. Allen and Martinez. Not sure exactly if Louis Crevier is going to be back in the lineup. Quite honestly, though, Blackhawks fans, I don't think Anders Sorensen is going to go this route just because TJ Brodie is a respected veteran and he's never been an NHL head coach. I don't think he's going to want to go stepping on vets' toes, especially when he doesn't really have experience with these types of guys. But man, if he's got some cojones, he wants to send a message, he should scratch TJ Brodie on Saturday afternoon. Even though TJ Brodie has been better, Wyatt Kaiser, you can let him play on the left-hand side on the third pairing. And Louis Crevier, even though he's not a good skater, he's a decent skater for his size, 6'7", 6'8". And hey, his first NHL goal not all that long ago came off the rush, came off him being activated. And that's something Sorensen mentioned, that he wants to see more out of his defenseman. And he's also very familiar with Louis Crevier, spent the last couple of years helping develop him down in Rockford. So I'm really curious if Big Lou's going to get in the lineup. And if he does, is it going to be for TJ Brody, or are they going to have Nolan Allen draw out? I would have Nolan Allen stay in. I don't know actually how I would handle this if I was Anders Sorensen. I'm glad it's not me having to make this type of decision, but one to be keeping an eye out for sure when the lineup drops tomorrow afternoon. As far as the top power play unit, Connor Bedard at the left-hand side. Got to get him the puck there. Got to tell him to shoot it. Got to get him some one-timer looks. Along with Ryan Donato, who's playing the bumper spot, Tyler Bertuzzi, who's at the net front, and Teuvo Teravainen. See, there's my issue about this top power play unit. Outside of Connor Bedard, who's lugging that bad boy in the offensive zone? We know it's not Ryan Donato. That's not his game. Tyler Bertuzzi, that's not his game. His game's in the crease and scoring dirty goals. Teuvo Teravainen doesn't really have that top-end speed and has not been a good puck carrier this year. So that's why I'd like to see Lukas Reichel there. Alex Vlasic wraps things up on the man advantage for the Blackhawks at the blue line, the only defenseman outside of Louis Crevier who can score goals apparently on the back end for this team. As far as what to watch for, Blackhawks fans, first and foremost, does Connor Bedard get more looks off of the rush / how does he fare with Philip Kurashev and Teuvo Teravainen? It might take a little bit, and I think we need to be patient to see kind of some of the differences between Anders Sorensen's style and mentality and Luke Richardson's, but it is something to look for against the Jets and also as we move forward next week and throughout the rest of December. Number 2, are the defensemen more involved in the offensive zone? I think that also is something to really push when Connor Bedard is out there as well. That was something I forgot to mention during segment 2 that was referenced in Scott Powers' article, that Connor Bedard, as someone who kind of like a Nathan McKinnon style player in the offensive zone, more so does his best work from near the blue line as opposed to down low below the dots. But when you have Connor Bedard up there, you got to have activation from your defensemen along the wall to keep the pucks in play. So that's certainly something to be keeping an eye out for. And also just do some of the veterans wake up and have a good performance. One thing I kind of haven't talked about is players like Tyler Bertuzzi, Teuvo Teravainen, TJ Brody, guys who are brought in to help make this team better. Whether it's right or wrong, I'm sure they feel some of the responsibility of Luke Richardson being fired. And from all accounts, I mean, Kyle Davidson was almost tearing up talking about Luke and his wife Stephanie and how special of people they are. And Luke was Kyle's first big head coaching hire, of course. They had a good relationship, and that's basically the same sentiment that all of the players shared. So it's tough, and I'm sure a lot of those veterans feel like they let Luke Richardson down. Just as I mentioned yesterday, Luke Richardson probably feels like he let the team down. Honestly, it was a definite culmination of both that ultimately led to him being fired. And that's something that I wanted to be sure to mention in my Blackhawks Deep Dive 1.0 and my Blackhawks Deep Dive 2.0 is, yeah, the numbers don't look good, and I think the coaching does have an influence on that. Ultimately, all of these guys, especially the big free agent signings and the key veteran forwards outside of Connor Bedard, have been uber disappointing this year, and that's what's really been killing this team. Teravainen, Kurashev, Bertuzzi, Hall, those guys' lack of consistency has absolutely crushed this team. So I'm sure they're feeling some of the responsibility for Luke Richardson now being out of a job. Interested to see how some of those guys respond in this next stretch of games, and maybe they have a little bit of added motivation on there and a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. There is everything to know before the Blackhawks take on the Winnipeg Jets tomorrow, 3 p.m. Central Time. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. That way, you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can check me out on X at Jack Bushman too, but you got to go and follow at Talkin' Hockey so that you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until the next episode, everyone, enjoy your weekends. Oh yeah, Mailbag Monday right around the corner. If you're still tuning in and watching me, drop those Blackhawks related questions down in the comment section below. Until then, enjoy your weekends. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.